Hello, everyone, and welcome to the group by clause. Okay, now that we've been introduced to aggregate functions, we got to talk about another situation. As you noticed before, our aggregate functions were very simple. They basically just went through a singular table with a single type of where clause, meaning we were just grouping it by either the whole or we were grouping it by an individual entity, basically a customer in our example. But what if we want to do a query that brings back um, not just one customer, but we want to know the sales for all customers in one query, or we want to know the sales for all stores in one query? Well, to do that, you're going to have to be introduced to the group by clause. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. And so what we're going to do in this particular video is understand the group by clause, and we're going to apply it. Okay, I'm going to kind of walk through this entire presentation, if you will, and then we'll go out and we'll try it again with our database instead of flipping back and forth like we did before. So the purpose of the group by clause is used to collaboration select statement to arrange identical data into groups. So once again, tell me all the customers and what their sales were. Tell me all the stores and what their sales were. Make sense? Though the group by clause can be used without aggregate functions, and you can actually see that out there without aggregate functions, it's very rare. In most cases, if you want to group data without an aggregate, you would probably use a distinct clause. Once again, I recommend you go to W3 Schools if you don't know about the distinct clause. But it's a very good clause also that will allow you to group some things, basically together without aggregate. So in my experience, I've only used group by clause with aggregates, but it is possible, I guess, to be able to do it without it. But I haven't come across a situation when I actually needed to do that. Anyway, all right. So group bys are used with aggregates. For the most part, the group by clause follows the where clause in the select statement and precedes the order clause. Oh my goodness, we're getting a lot of clauses all of a sudden. So how it kind of works is we're going to select, we'll have our aggregate sitting up here, we'll have our tables, we'll have a where condition if need be, and then we'll have a group by clause, okay? The SQL group by clause can be used in the select statement to collect data across multiple records and groups. So once again, another kind of, I want to say an outline of how this should actually work. So select from tables, where, group by accordingly. Here's how this works. We have our aggregate sitting there, okay? Whoops, I'm going to go back. I'm sorry. In this case, I want to make sure I stress something. I'm going to probably stress it 2 or 3 times in this video. So I'll ask for your forgiveness already. All right. Anytime you decide you want to put an additional column within the select statement where there's an aggregate, it must be part of the group by clause. As a matter of fact, if you don't do that, you will get an error in your select statement, and I will demonstrate that here a little bit later. All right? So the only time you want to add an additional column with an aggregate is when you want to group it by something. In this particular case, maybe it's a customer. Maybe it's a store, okay, in our examples. It could be anything based upon what your database is doing. So the only time you add a different, okay, column in your select statement with an aggregate, it must be to group it. And if that's the case, it must be in the group by clause. Excuse me. Does that make sense? Keep that in the back of your mind. Hopefully that resonates with you and it makes some sense because once again, if I'm gonna have an aggregate, the only reason I want to introduce another column would be to group it. Okay. Again, like customer name up there or whatever it is. We want to group it that way. Okay. Here's sort of how it works. I'm going to kind of show you an example in these slides. So in this case here, we're applying the group by clause. So if we sit back and we just go ahead and we have our little database here, you see pears, bananas, and oranges, and so on, and a category ID. We're going to go ahead and count the total products, okay? If we do that, our total products will come back based upon our category, okay? As you can see, count total products, INT category ID, all right? And we're going to group it by the INT category ID. That makes sense? So because I added this category ID, it must be in the group by clause. If I didn't have this category ID, it would have just counted the 7 products in there. That's what would have came back. But now that I introduced the category ID, it's going to group it as such. So as you can see, it should have 4 in category 50, 1 in category 20, or 2 in category 25, and 1 in category 75. And that's what would actually come back in your result set. Once again, really good information. So now I can actually run one query to determine the sales of all customers, run one query to figure out how many products I have based on categories within a supermarket. That's good information for somebody, okay? Let's see. In this case here, again, we kind of go apply this thing. Now we're going to break it down even a little bit further. Category ID and product name, okay? I can see that I made a mistake already. Category ID and product name, in this case here. If I actually tried to do this without putting it in my group by clause, you will get an error. You cannot do that, okay? And so if I actually did this one, I'm kind of trying to figure out what my answer would be. So it's important to remember that the column that is select clause must be part of the group. I'm not sure why I would put a product name up here to begin with, just for the mere fact that it's probably going to it's going to be part of the group by, and with that said, it's probably going to break that whole thing up. So, okay, but once again, if you don't have it up there, you're going to get an error in the group by clause. If you don't, let me say this again, I'm sorry. Slow down, Bob, right? If you introduce a column in the select statement and do not have it in the group by clause, where there's an aggregate, you will get an error. The only time you want additional columns up here is when you want to group your data into subgroups of the aggregates. All right? Whew, there you go. That's the group by clause. I'm going to take you out now and show you, give you an example of it based upon our database. But once again, as we finish this up, we're going to talk about the having clause too. It'll be a short little video also. All right, so let's go out of this and let's go over to our example. Okay, and here's the situation right here. So in this case here, we're going to write an aggregate to show the total sales per store. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. And as you can see, there they are, store ID, total sales, each one. Pretty slick, huh? Very powerful and pretty slick. Once again, though, if I did something and I did not have this group by clause in here, and I decided to have my aggregate without a group by because I introduced a new column with the aggregate, you're going to get this error right here. It is invalid in the select list because it's not contained in either an aggregate function or the group by clause. My guess is you will experience that error. When you read it, don't freak out. Just remember that any column within the select statement that's introduced where there's an aggregate must be part of the group by. Okay, did I repeat that enough for you now? You're rolling your eyes and going, God, would you shut up? I don't blame you. And so in this case here, this is how it works. It's pretty simple, okay? And now, can I have other groups? Of course I can. I can actually break this down a little bit further if I wanted to. Let's see. If I wanted to sit back and say by store ID, and I also wanted to know it by customer ID, okay, I could do this very easily, okay? So in this case, if I ran this, hopefully you're screaming, Bob, you didn't put it in the group by clause. You're absolutely right. I'm going to get that error. So in this case here, what I would need to do is add customer to the group by clause. Now, is it important of the order of my columns in the group by clause? Yes, it is. Just like order by, it's going to group it by the first one first, basically, and then after that, it's going to group it by this one, by the next one, the secondary, and then tertiary, and so on. So you want to know the order in which you want to do your groups. So if you want a group within a group within a group, basically little subgroups, in this case, what we're going to do is look at each store, then we're going to look at the customers within each store. So let's go ahead and run this, see what comes back for us. As you can see, whoops, I didn't have any. There it is, I'm sorry. So store ID 111, customers. See that right there? And then basically, so for the store, it grouped it by the store, then it grouped it by each customer. Interesting enough, see the customer in store also bought something from store 2. This customer 1 did. All right. So, but our primary grouping is by store. Does that make sense? I hope it does. If I actually turn that around, Control R, and let's let's put this one over here. You'll see a totally different result set coming back. It's going to group it by the customer first. There you go. Whoops, let's go ahead. I'm sorry. Based upon that, let's go ahead and reorder these two so it makes a little more sense when we're looking at it. There we go. One more time, apologize about that. There we go. So in this case here, the customer first and then the store. So customer one, okay, and then go from there. Make sense? All right, cool, cool, cool. And let's see, the reason that didn't come back exactly what I liked, because we also ordered it by store ID. I probably would change this around. And now let's run this one more time. It makes a little bit more sense. We grouped it by customer first, store one, store two. So you can see a little bit different result set based upon that. All right, so that's the group by clause. I think you know the rule. Do I need to say it one more time? I think I will. Anytime you introduce a new column within the select statement, all right, or the select clause, where there's an aggregate, it must be part of the group by clause. Here's the good news. If you try and do it without it, you're going to get an error. You already saw that. All right, I'm done with this video. See you in the next one.